Jordan is 34, pre-approval letter in hand, first house on the table. Then the loan officer turns the screen around. The rate is almost 2 points higher than the number Jordan ran back in the spring. Same house, same income, same down payment. $400 more every month for 30 years. Rates just moved, the loan officer says, like weather. You'd expect a dollar collapse to look like the movies. Banks shutting their doors, empty grocery shelves, a president addressing the nation from a bunker, riots in the streets. It doesn't. It looks exactly like Jordan's mortgage quote. Because the thing that's been propping up American borrowing costs for 80 years is already slipping, quietly, for 25 years running. The dollar's share of the world's reserves has dropped from 71% to just 57% since 2000. And it shows up not as a headline, but as a number on a loan document that's just a little worse than it should be. We're going to walk through exactly what that thing is, why it's disappearing, and what it actually costs people like Jordan, dollar by dollar. Chapter 1. In 1965, France's finance minister looked at the American financial system and called it something that stuck, an exorbitant privilege. What he meant was simple and a little maddening. When other countries needed dollars, they had to earn them by shipping out real goods, real labor, real gold. When America needed money, it just issued more of its own currency, and the rest of the world lined up to hold it anyway. That single asymmetry built the entire foundation of modern American borrowing. Here's the mechanism, stripped of the jargon. America sells the rest of the world safe, boring, low-yield assets, mostly treasury bonds. In return, America buys the rest of the world's riskier, higher-yield assets, corporate stakes, real estate, foreign businesses. The spread between what America pays out and what it earns back has run 2 to 3% a year for decades. It's not a loophole. It's not a scandal. It's the deal the whole system quietly runs on. But privilege isn't free. It comes with a specific kind of duty attached. Economists Pierre-Olivier, Garinchas, and Helene Ray notice something bracing about the years when the world panics, a financial crash, a war, a pandemic. Investors everywhere rush into dollars for safety, which pushes the dollar's value up right when it hurts America the most. Because those treasury bonds foreign countries hold are priced in dollars, but the risky foreign assets America owns are priced in euros, yen, pesos, whatever currency they're denominated in. A stronger dollar quietly shrinks the value of everything America owns abroad while leaving what it owes exactly the same. In the worst moments for the rest of the world, America absorbs the shock and eats the loss. That's the deal. Cheap money in exchange for playing shock absorber when the whole system rattles. There's a second cost, too. One economist, Michael Pettis, has spent years describing. Every country that wants to build up a stockpile of dollar reserves has to sell more than it buys and park the difference in American assets. That means America has to be willing to buy more than it sells, year after year, just to give the rest of the world somewhere to put its savings. It's part of why entire American manufacturing regions hollowed out over the past few decades. Cheap borrowing on one side, a shrinking industrial base on the other. Nobody built that trade on purpose. It's baked into what it means to run the world's reserve currency. And that deal doesn't stay locked in a vault in Washington. It leaks straight into ordinary life. Because foreign central banks buying up treasury bonds at massive scale pushes those bond yields down, and mortgage rates are priced directly off that number. Corporate borrowing costs track it too. So does the interest on the national debt itself. For 80 years, that foreign appetite for dollars has been quietly subsidizing the rate Jordan should have gotten on that house, which means the privilege was never really America's alone to keep. It only works as long as the rest of the world keeps showing up to buy in. And for the first time in a generation, fewer of them are. Chapter 2. 25 years ago, dollars made up about 71% of every foreign exchange reserve held by a central bank anywhere on Earth. Today, that number sits at 57%. Not overnight. Not from one crisis. 1 percentage point at a time, year after year, quarter after quarter, until the chart just kept sliding in the same direction. The people driving that slide aren't traders panicking at 2 a.m. They're central banks, moving with the patience of institutions planning for the next 50 years, not the next headline. Start with gold. For 3 straight years running, central banks bought more than 1,000 tons of physical gold annually. Poland, Turkey, India, Brazil, China, all stacking bullion in vaults, not because gold pays interest, it pays none, but because gold can't be frozen, sanctioned, or cut off from a payment network with a single phone call. A treasury bond can be. Gold cannot. That's the entire pitch. Then there's trade. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and several newer members moved over $1 trillion in trade between themselves last year. A decade ago, roughly 1 in 5 of those trades settled in a currency that wasn't the dollar. Now it's closer to 2 in 3. Special accounts, new payment networks built to route around the old ones, bilateral deals that skip the dollar step entirely, all of it engineered specifically to reduce dependence on the very system that gave America its privilege in the first place. None of this made the evening news. There was no single day where anyone could point to a chart and say, that's when it broke. It's closer to erosion than collapse, water finding its way around a dam 1 drop at a time, until one day, the dam just isn't holding back what it used to. That sounds like the dollar's finished. It isn't. And the part almost nobody mentions is the reason why. Chapter 3. Here's the part that gets left out of every doom-heavy version of this story. The dollar is still, by a wide margin, the most used currency on the planet. 89% of all foreign exchange trades on Earth still involve the dollar on one side of the transaction. 54% of global trade gets invoiced in dollars, even trade that has nothing to do with America. That's not a currency on its way out. That's a currency that still runs the plumbing of the entire global economy, whether people are rooting for it or against it. And the reason isn't sentiment. It's that nobody else can actually do the job. The euro looks like the obvious replacement until you notice it doesn't have one unified government bond market the way the dollar has US treasuries. 19 different countries, 19 different bond markets. No single asset large enough or liquid enough to absorb the kind of money that floods towards safety every time something goes wrong in the world. When investors panic, they still need somewhere enormous and liquid to park trillions of dollars in minutes. Right now, only treasuries can hold that weight. China's currency has the size to matter, but Beijing still controls how much money can move in and out of the country. A currency that can be locked at the border isn't a currency the rest of the world can fully trust with its savings. That's why the yuan sits under 2% of global reserves, despite belonging to the second largest economy on Earth. There's more evidence for this stubbornness, and it comes from an unlikely place: corporate and bank debt markets. Researchers at the Bank for International Settlements tracked how companies and banks around the world choose which currency to borrow in when they issue bonds outside their home country, and the pattern isn't a straight decline either. Back in the early 2000s, dollar-denominated debt made up about 60% of that market. It dropped to around 43% during the 2008 financial crisis as euro-denominated bank debt surged. Then it recovered, climbing back to around 60% by the late 2010s and holding there for years since. That's not a currency in freefall. That's a currency riding waves, driven by interest rate differences and exchange rate policy, not a one-way slide toward irrelevance. Even the local currency trade deals meant to bypass the dollar come with friction nobody advertises. When India started settling oil trades in rupees through special accounts instead of dollars, the oil exporting countries on the other end of those deals ended up sitting on piles of rupees they couldn't easily spend anywhere except back inside India. A currency nobody outside your borders wants to hold isn't a replacement for the dollar. It's a workaround with its own new problems attached. Even the gold story is more complicated than it looks. Most of that jump in gold's reserve value wasn't central banks dumping treasuries to buy bullion. It was the price of gold itself climbing past $4,000 an ounce by the end of last year. The gold got more valuable. The buying didn't suddenly explode to match. So the honest answer sits in an uncomfortable middle. Not collapsing. Not fine either. Just slowly, unevenly losing ground with no challenger ready to take the crown, which somehow makes it more dangerous, not less. A dramatic collapse gets a headline and a government response. A quiet, contested slide gets ignored, right up until it's already showing up on somebody's mortgage statement. Which brings it back to Jordan, standing at that desk, holding a number that doesn't quite add up yet. Chapter 4. Nobody experiences declining reserve currency status directly. What they experience is 3 specific bills, showing up in 3 specific places, all traced back to the same root cause. The first is imports. When the dollar weakens against other currencies, everything America buys from abroad costs more in dollar terms. Oil, electronics, coffee, fertilizer, the parts inside a car engine. None of these prices moved because a factory somewhere got more expensive to run. They moved because the dollar buys less of the world than it used to. That cost doesn't stay overseas. It rides straight through the supply chain and lands on a receipt. The second is interest rates. Remember that foreign demand for treasury bonds that used to keep borrowing costs artificially low? As that demand softens, the Treasury has to offer higher yields to attract buyers who are no longer showing up automatically. Higher Treasury yields drag mortgage rates up with them, since 30-year fixed rates are priced directly off that benchmark. They drag corporate borrowing costs up too, which means businesses pay more to expand, hire, or simply keep the lights on. This is Jordan's mortgage quote, in full. Not bad luck. Not a bad credit score. A direct line running from central banks in Warsaw and Beijing, buying less U.S. debt, straight to a loan officer turning a screen around and saying $400 more a month, like it's weather. It's also Marcus's line of credit. Marcus owns a print shop 2 blocks from where Jordan is standing, and he's been renewing the same working capital loan for 6 years running, the one that covers payroll during slow months. This year, the renewal came back with a rate nearly 2 points higher than last time. No explanation beyond the market moved. He didn't do anything differently. His business didn't get riskier. The cost of money itself got more expensive, for him and for every other small business owner borrowing against next month's revenue, because the demand that used to keep those rates artificially low just isn't showing up the way it used to. Credit cards feel the same pressure, just slower to show up on a statement. Annual percentage rates on revolving debt track the Federal Reserve's benchmark rate closely. So as that benchmark climbs to attract buyers who used to show up automatically, so does the interest charged on every balance carried past the due date. For a lot of households already stretched thin by higher grocery and gas prices, that's the moment a manageable balance turns into one that never quite gets paid down. The third channel is the quietest and the cruelest: real wages. When import costs rise and businesses face higher borrowing costs at the same time, payroll is usually the first place they pull back. Raises get smaller or disappear. Hiring slows. Meanwhile, the grocery bill keeps climbing regardless, because half of what's on that list came from somewhere else in the world, priced in a currency that isn't worth what it used to be. The paycheck stays roughly the same. Everything it has to cover doesn't. None of these 3 channels needed a single dramatic event to arrive. No bank run, no riot, no president in a bunker. Just a mortgage, quote, a loan renewal, and a grocery total, each one a few percentage points worse than it should be, showing up in 3 different households on the same ordinary Tuesday. Chapter 5. Here's the part almost nobody frames correctly. This isn't a single event with a before and after. It's a timeline, and it moves in 3 distinct phases. The first 12 months look exactly like what Jordan and Marcus just lived through. Treasury yields climb, the dollar softens, mortgage rates and loan renewals adjust upward, import prices creep. Nothing dramatic, just numbers landing a little worse than expected. The next 1 to 3 years is where it compounds. Supply chains reprice around the new normal. Consumer inflation settles into energy and food, specifically, the categories hardest to substitute away from. Corporate borrowing costs stay elevated long enough to slow hiring, and credit card default rates start trending upward as households absorb higher revolving debt costs on top of everything else. The 5 to 10-year horizon is where it becomes structural rather than temporary. Homeownership rates settle lower than they would have otherwise, because the mortgage math simply doesn't work for as many people. Retirement savings need to stretch further because the interest rate environment that used to make bonds a safe, steady bet now demands more from savers to get the same result. It isn't a crash. It's a permanently different set of numbers that an entire generation has to plan around. So what does someone do with that? Not panic. Panic was for the version of this that lives in viral videos and never actually happens. The people who understood this shift early didn't do anything dramatic. They held some physical gold, not because it pays anything, but because it doesn't answer to anyone's balance sheet. They moved some savings into inflation-protected bonds, the kind that adjust their value alongside rising prices instead of losing to them. They locked in fixed rates while they still could, rather than riding a floating rate up. There's a version of this that plays out even further out, past the 10-year mark, where entire industries quietly reshuffle. Companies that spent decades manufacturing overseas because it was cheaper start reconsidering, since a weaker dollar makes importing less of a bargain than it used to be. That's not a headline either. It's a slow reshoring, one factory decision at a time, the mirror image of the slow bleed that started it. None of that undoes what's happening. It just means the bill, when it arrives, doesn't arrive as a surprise. Back at that desk, Jordan is still holding the letter, still doing the math. $400 a month, 30 years, against a house that felt affordable 3 months ago. The number on that page isn't a mistake. It's not bad timing either. It's the exorbitant privilege, quietly changing hands, one mortgage at a time, whether anyone in that room understands what they're looking at or not. Now Jordan does.